Which class should you pick in Season of Discovery? This is the biggest question everyone faces right now, because each and every class from Classic World of Warcraft is getting massive changes that completely redefine the way we experience the game. So hopefully by the end of this video, you should have a much better understanding of which class you should pick to play, because today I'm going to give you all the pros and cons of each class, as well as what to expect from their performance and playstyle. And right off the bat, if you're wondering if your class that you love so much is gonna be good, well, then probably, because every single class in the game gets a lot stronger. Every single build in the game gets a lot stronger, even the ones that were conventionally thought of as meme builds. And bear in mind, each class can have class changes happen to them. There were some recent buffs and nerfs, and I'll try to address them in this video as well. But at least gone are the days of bringing 26 Fury Warriors to a raid and having everyone else just be there as support. Don't let anyone tell you what you can and can't play, because this season is all about having fun and discovering new things. So with that being said, let's dive right in. So let's start with the Warriors, the quintessential kings of Classic. And they're the kings of Classic for a reason, because they scale incredibly well as the game progresses. Getting stronger gear and more buffs benefits the playstyle of Warriors completely, because the more damage they do, the more rage they generate, and the more rage they generate, the more damage they can continue doing. With runes like Flagellation and Consumed by Rage, Warriors are guaranteed powerhouses at the higher levels. They also have runes that buff both dual wielding and two-handed specializations, making it so that you can play with either of these playstyles if you want a DPS. And as tanks, there was some data mining of a hidden Gladiator stance, which would allow Warriors to wear a shield while also still doing pretty strong damage and having incredible threat, which is kind of the quintessential aspect of Classic WoW. The only downside to Warriors right now is that at level 25, they're missing a massive part of their toolkit. As the class scales with the more power they get, the lower levels also tend to feel the most weak. For DPS, the talent Flurry alone would give them 30% more attack speed and bring their class more online. So don't worry if you're not the absolute Giga Chads within Phase 1, because Warriors are still the best class for scaling in World of Warcraft Classic, and they always have been. Paladins are looking like one of the biggest winners of Season of Discovery. As tanks, they finally have a much needed taunt ability. As damage, they rise from the ashes to be DPS kings. And as healers, they remain one of the most versatile and powerful specs with a completely well-rounded kit that makes them necessary for every raid group. Paladin tanks are built for pulling large amount of enemies and AoEing them down, blocking with their shields to reduce incoming damage, and the new Hand of Reckoning rune finally gives them that much needed taunt. It also gives them an added 80% to all of their threat generation, so they no longer will ever have to worry about losing aggro. They can also do more AoE damage if they decide to grab Divine Storm, and Avenger's Shield is a ranged ability that absolutely pumps. As far as damage goes, Retribution Paladins just received quite a large nerf, but that nerf is not actually hurting them enough to bring them down from one of the strongest DPS classes in the entire game right now. The nerf they received specifically made it so that their Seal of Martyrdom no longer hit 3 targets at one time for sustained cleave. Instead, it is now a seal to return mana to the Paladin himself as well as the rest of the raid. But the Paladins can just choose to grab Divine Storm instead, and the cooldown of Crusader Strike was brought up from 4 seconds to 6 seconds, just making it a little bit longer for you to be able to use that ability again. And as always, Paladins still come with blessings, some of the most powerful buffs in the entire game. Salvation alone is one of the reasons why most guilds actually go Alliance. Those things combined with their ability to bubble themselves and anyone else in their party to instantly save their lives or instantly drop a full heal into the tank makes Paladins an absolutely top class pick for all of Season of Discovery. And as powerful and essential as Paladins are to the Alliance, the Horde received a lot of buffs to their unique class, the Shaman. Shamans were the most sought after healer in Classic because of their ability to heal multiple targets, and of course because they brought Wind Fury Totem with them, which is now kind of shared with another class, but we'll get into that later. Shaman healers continue to shine with new abilities that increase both their AoE healing, as well as some single target healing runes that put them on par with Paladins at keeping tanks alive. Shamans can also finally play the beloved enhanced specialization and not get kicked out of the raids. Although Reddit might be convincing you that they are completely missing out on the two-handed enhanced build that would run around and one-shot people in PvP, the dual-wield playstyle of enhancement will turn them to incredibly powerful and sustained damage dealers. They also come with runes that can help deal with any sort of mana issues they might have experienced beforehand. And not only that, but Shamans can also become tanks now in Season of Mastery, and they might even be the strongest AoE tanks in the entire entire game. Throw on a shield and receive mana back every single time you block a physical attack. This means Shaman tanks are incredibly powerful for tanking a ton of mobs at one time, just like Paladins are for Alliance. They have a frontal cone of cold ability that's currently uncapped on how many targets it can hit, and it generates a huge amount of threat. And they finally have a single target taunt, and in my opinion, they're one of the most fun tanks to play. That's just from my experience playing them in the BFD raid. Lastly, Shamans can also become a ranged caster that pumps. With runes like Lava Burst and Overload, Shamans can not only one-shot people in PvP, but they will be continuously pumping in PvE as well. The only drawback in phase 1 is that Shamans don't yet have Chain Lightning at level 25. And on the topic of hybrid classes, let's talk about Druids. A lot of work has been put in to make sure that all 4 Druid specs are completely viable. And I say 4 because Druids can also now differentiate between tanking and feral DPS. Every single melee in Classic is going to absolutely fight over whoever gets the feral Druid in their group. And that's because Druids now bring a new and improved Wind Fury called Wild Strikes. That's right, we now have Wind Fury for Alliance, and this is even a better Wind Fury for Horde. That's because Wild Strikes does not take up a weapon enhancement slot, meaning that rogues and warriors or anyone else can also use sharpening stones or poisons and still benefit from getting those huge Wind Fury procs. Feral DPS will get Savage Roar, a new finishing move that gives the kitty a raw 30% extra damage. This combined with Mangle will make Feral Druid DPS extremely sought after in all raid environments. As tanks, Feral Druids get a lot more survivability with Survival of the Fittest, but they can also bring that Wind Fury buff if they need to. Feral Druids finally get an interrupt, and they have more threat generation than ever before with the new ability Lacerate. And Boom Chickens are no longer a meme spec. Balanced Druids get Sunfire and Star Surge as new spells that round out their arsenal, but they also completely forego any sort of mana issues because they can get a rune that makes their Wrath spell completely free to cast. This means while leveling, you will literally never have to stop to drink. As for healers in Classic, Druids originally weren't even able to use most of their abilities. That's because of the way that buff capped work. If you don't know what that is, essentially you could only have up to 32 buffs on you at one time, and Druid heals would also count as a buff themselves. So if you accidentally threw a rejuve on your main tank, you might have actually pushed off their most important world buff. This is no longer the case, and Druids can finally use all of their abilities. Not only that, but they finally get some new abilities as well. Runes like Wild Growth will make Druids one of the most powerful raid-wide healing classes in the entire game. And if you're ever anticipating a lot of damage to go out, the Druid can perfectly prepare for all of that and have everyone healed up right after. Hunters are the last remaining pure DPS class in all of Season of Discovery, with multiple playstyles from pet builds to ranged snipers and even a fully melee hunter. That's right, melee hunters are actually a thing in this game, and Thunder Fury might genuinely now be a hunter weapon. It's crucial to mention that hunters can now bring the Blessing of Kings buff over to the Horde side with Aspect of the Lion. This increases everybody's stats by 10% and gives the hunter himself an extra 10% to that bonus. This will be absolutely essential if you are the only hunter in a group. Although the melee build might not be fully fleshed out in phase 1 of Season of Discovery, you get the new ability Flanking Strike, where you and your pet both hit for 100% weapon damage, and it also buffs your Raptor Strike and Mongoose Bite abilities. Melee hunters also get an incredible cleave ability that is quite literally one of the only uncapped cleave abilities in the entire game. So if your tank pulls the entire dungeon at one time, it looks like there's no damage fall off of you hitting every single target all at once. Range hunters can go with the Lone Wolf talent to get rid of their pet and increase all of their damage by 25%. Pairing this with the Sniper training talent that gives all of your abilities an extra 30% crit chance makes hunters an absolute force to be reckoned with. Hunters can also choose a new ranged ability between Explosive Shot or Chimera Shot. Although Explosive Shot itself will share a CD with Aim Shot and Arcane Shot, I go much further into the hunter builds and optimization in my hunter guide on the channel. The hunter pet build will give you an actual tank with your pet, making their taunt significantly more effective, basically not being useless because taunt beforehand was pretty useless. You can also learn Kill Command to buff your pet's damage even further, and these runes will make Hunter one of the most powerful leveling classes in the entire game. And in the open world PvP of Ashenvale or Warsong Gulch, Hunters can just stand back at range and have the leeway to absolutely delete everyone in front of them, which is going to make them one of my favorite classes in Season of Discovery. Rogues have always been one of the best classes for both PvP and PvE in classic World of Warcraft, and this remains true in Season of Discovery. Just for PvP alone, rogues are getting a ranged kidney shot. and a range slow ability that's reminiscent of outlaw rogues if you've ever played retail. This solves one of the rogue's biggest issues when fighting other players, and that was if someone ever got out of range of you, rogues turned from the predator to the prey. There was very little to do to close the gap, and that issue has been completely solved with these abilities. As for PvE, rogues have always been able to choose between daggers and swords as how they want to deal incredible damage. The strongest single rune that rogues have seen so far is one that reduces the energy of their backstab and ambush abilities by a whopping 20 energy. That rune itself is one of the strongest runes we've seen this entire season. They also get a new double dagger playstyle with Mutilate. This hits with both of your daggers at the same time and pairs with the Deadly Brew and Envenom runes to jump up the rogue's damage. Sword and Mace rogues can use both of those runes as well and gain the new hard-hitting ability called Saber Slash. But rogues aren't pigeonholed to just being a DPS class anymore. Rogue tanks were used in Hardcore Classic to dodge all of the attacks on bosses like Vesuvius or Patchwork in Naxxramas, and that playstyle is exactly translated to the new rogue tanking in Season of Discovery. Like the other tanks, rogues get their very own taunt. But unlike other tanks, rogues prefer to actually not be hit at all. Instead, all of the rogues' tanking abilities increase their avoidance, with things like parry and dodge getting so strong even that at level 60 and the current runes in the game right now, you can hit over 100% avoidance with all world buffs. This means that quite literally, rogue tanks would never get hit by any of the boss's melee swings and only take damage from things like magical spells. The biggest flaws rogues have currently is their lack of AoE abilities. They are a purely single target class, especially at level 25, but I would wager that Blizzard intends to change that as we learn new spells moving towards max level. So with that in mind, rogues are a very strong pick, especially if you want to do both PvP and PvE. By now, you've probably heard that Warlocks can turn into giant demon tanks in Season of Discovery. Warlocks as a class are probably getting the biggest changes in this season, and not only aesthetically. While Warlocks in Original Classic only had 1 or 2 abilities to use, and even in TBC, they just sat there spamming Shadow Bolt, that is no longer the case. Warlocks have the option of going with a fire damage build, a damage over time build with Affliction, or they can become demons themselves and be one of the most powerful AoE tanks in the game. The Metamorphosis rune alone completely changes the class. This gives them 500% more armor, an instant cast Searing Pain, a melee taunt, a melee cleave, and it turns their drain life into a more powerful siphon life. This one rune will also make Warlocks almost impossible to kill in any PvP situation. So if you thought Snuts was already a monster at 1v1s before, just wait until he gets his hands on something like this. Warlocks finally have solid AoE with the new Shadow Bolt Volley rune. Then they can swap this out on boss fights for the huge damage of Chaos Bolt or the damage over time boost of Haunt. Fire builds with Incinerate and Lake of Fire turn Warlocks from Shadow Bolt spamming soggy pancakes to Giga Chad DPS pumping waffles. The dot spec of Affliction will most likely receive more runes in the future, allowing the class to truly ramp up their damage, but either way, Warlocks in Classic are finally looking as strong as they've always claimed to be.
See, dude, just wait until the Warlocks get their Bloodvine. Wait until they get to AQ and they get their 2.5. Just wait until they get to next, man. Once they have that next gear.
The Priest runes focus on increasing their healing and making the Shadow spec more viable. Shadow Priest can get Mind Seer, which is an extremely powerful AoE ability if the raid pulls packs large enough. One of the coolest new abilities is called Homunculi. This splits the priest's soul into 3 miniature copies of itself, and they all start attacking the target, putting up some of the game's most powerful debuffs, including reducing the target's attack power, attack speed, and armor. And if these stack with things like Sunder Armor, this is going to be one of the most powerful runes in the entire game. Priests can also finally grab Shadow Word Death, and Healing Priests get some of the class's most iconic spells, like Penance, Prayer of Mending, and Circle of Healing. While Priests may struggle with mana a bit at the lower levels, there's no denying that both Healing and Shadow Priests are getting huge buffs as we move throughout this season. And Mages remain the master of the elements, whether it be Fire, Frost, or Arcane. But not only that, but Mages are now actually gonna be healers as well. Although Mage Healing has already received nerfs before the game even comes out, Mages now have 3 unique healing abilities that can allow them to do a ton of damage while also keeping everybody in the party or raid alive. Fire mages are getting huge abilities with things like Living Bomb and Living Flame. And arcane mages are moving away from consistently casting Frostbolt to using things like Arcane Blast and Arcane Surge. And although Frostbolt might no longer be the meta ability within PvE situations, Frost mages get a ton more ways to deal out extra damage with abilities like Ice Lance pairing with things like Fingers of Frost, making them absolute powerhouses in PvP that can delete people in seconds. Each and every class is gonna be viable and is getting support from new runes in Season of Discovery. So you don't have to pick any specific class if you wanna be invited to a raid anymore. Just choose whichever you like, whichever you think is gonna be most fun, and whichever playstyles appeal to you the most. If you like this video and want more guides that go in depth on any of the classes, especially any of the DPS classes, showing you what the new talents are, what the best runes are, what your best gearing is, and what your new rotations will be, currently at level 25, as well as updated ones when we get to the higher levels, then make sure to check those out on my page or subscribe for the future ones as the new phases come out. And of course, I will be streaming the launch of Season of Discovery right here on the YouTube as well as over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Sarthe. So if there's anything I missed, if you have any questions about any of the classes, if you want to see any of the different builds, or you want to know if there's something that could be more viable, then definitely make sure to ask me either here in the comments or ask me live on stream sometime whenever I'm live. And shout out to everyone who's supporting the YouTube through the channel memberships. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you all on the next one.